Joining us now, Pete Sousa,
Hey,
also
what's
part
up,
of
Mosley?
the Rogue community, the 360, whatever all the other things that were called. We're under that umbrella. Oh, look at that! I like that background there. Um, Great to be with you, Pete. Welcome to the Mosley Show, and
Let's go.
you'll be headed out tomorrow. It's always interesting to see your itinerary because Big 12 like midweek, then you could be on an AAC game. You never know. Be on the lookout because Penny Hardaway was got extremely emotional the other night after a loss. So I mean, Pete, we always have drama, but doesn't this feel like this season? I'm even thinking about this very morning, Mick Cronin's press conference, having to apologize for throwing his own player out of a game. Doesn't it feel like we have even more drama than usual in college basketball?
It does. And I don't know if it's all the media outlets and all the coverage, or if it is just like to what you're saying, like a year that's beyond any other excitement wise. But it seems like, and even from a quality perspective, like every time you turn around, especially in the Big 12, there's another marquee game that's leading into like Scott Van Pelt on Sports Center. And it's a good look for the conference. But it's also, there's also some like the underbelly of stuff that people love to get into, like the Mick Cronin stuff, like the Darren Peterson stuff. There's a lot, there's a lot of meat on the bone, right?
Yeah, and that Cronin, and then we were just talking about earlier, even women's basketball. I mean, drama certainly. Kim Mulkey is no stranger to drama, but in this instance, she takes down Ole Miss with a big fourth quarter comeback, and then Coach Yo from Ole Miss. They had a great crowd there. Now it gets into it with Lane Kiffin this morning. I mean, the Lane Kiffin sort of interjects himself any sort of LSU / Ole Miss storyline. He's going to be right there, and I thought that was hilarious that even the LSU players, were holding up the Lane Kiffin pictures as they're there in Ole Miss. I mean, there's a lot of trolling going on.
Dude, and Stephen A. Smith was at the game. Like, it's just, there is a lot of excitement around college hoops. And it's funny, it's kind of transcended the NIL era that I think will be pretty easy for a lot of us to tap out in. Or not easy, but some people have trouble stomaching the way that these guys get to school and how quickly they may leave to go to somewhere else. But it's kind of like the action on the floor and the drama that you're talking about off of it that keeps us coming back,
Yeah, it's kind of fun, and then Mulkey sort of congratulated. She was like, "This is a great, people got to see LSU for the first time tonight." And
I feel, I love Kim Mulkey, like for what she does for college sports and the interest she brings to women's basketball. I don't think she gets enough credit for what she's done for the game of women's basketball. And I'm not saying like you're short on giving her credit. I know, she's like friend of the show and all that stuff, but it's interesting when you think about that she was in our backyard for as long as she was. And I know that became like whatever, an untenable situation, but she's such a legend and such a powerful figure.
by the way, it shouldn't have been untenable. I mean, like if
Yeah.
if most coaches that win 3 national championships, it does not become untenable unless somebody allows it to become
Well, Matt,
untenable.
and this is one thing. It speaks to your point about Mick Cronin, about the stuff that's going on with Tang, about more coaches that like we're hearing more sound bites from coaches than ever, like kind of like you touched on, because they're odd, they're compelling. The comments and the coaches, like these guys and women, it ain't. We're not talking about the mental board of health here. I think that's something, and that we need to, not we need to, but like I'm starting to remember, like Mick Cronin, the dude just doesn't seem well mentally. Like he is. I bet if I were to sit down with you and hang out with Mick Cronin for 25 minutes, I would probably end up really liking the guy and quoting him later on with all his basketball experience. But at surface level, he is not a likable dude at all. I wouldn't want him anywhere near my program. And he thinks he's bigger than UCLA, which is a basketball like historian. That annoys me. Every time I turn around, he's in front of a microphone. It's toxic. Like, enough is enough. On the other side of that, like, I really appreciated Coach Tang and the way he comported himself. And it is rubbish how they're trying to handle that situation at Kansas State. But maybe that's a negotiation we're just seeing play out before our eyes, right? More than likely. But man, there's so much excitement.
Pete, Jerome probably ended up hurting himself because he's a preacher. He actually is an ordained pastor, and he's a very. He doesn't know any
other way but to communicate honestly, and I really think that. And I think that you're right. That was his Achilles heel at the end of the day. Like, if you put him in front of a microphone, especially too, and you know this from all your years covering the NFL and the Cowboys, like that whole like cooling off period. I mean, it's kind of crazy. We jump right in there with questions, and these guys are just, sometimes reeling after like, a 30-point home loss to Cincinnati. Like, I can't imagine you're going to get like the most clear image of Jerome Tang and who he wants his program to be after a moment like that. But we don't give him much grace when we think about, well, I can't believe the guy said that. Well, it's like, I can understand why he said it. He probably wouldn't have said it tomorrow morning. But it's interesting how we grab these guys right after and then take them to task. Now, obviously the Kansas State thing is different. They're fishing there, and that's not cool.
Well, yeah, it's not like he probably earned getting fired just by virtue of being 111 and having 2 bad portal classes and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, even that Elite Eight run was great. What I remind people when people bring up Scott and the year Baylor's having, they're like, why are they not, is it time for a Scott Drew conversation? And I'm like, you have to understand the context of, and you'll always do this on the broadcast, and I've probably heard it more than I want to hear it, but it is an amazing job that he did, what he took over. I mean, in some ways, it's Signetti-like. He took over a nothing program, the Ashes. They didn't even get to play a non-conference slate. They didn't have scholarships, and he kind of turned Baylor into a juggernaut. And so they're having one miserably horrible season. But I mean, we're probably so close to it, Pete. It's not like other programs don't have bad seasons. It's just they've had so many good players that this just feel, and so many great seasons that this just feels awful, right? But you don't start thinking about, we should move on from Scott. This thing's like 2 years removed from Kentucky trying to hire your head coach away. So we're supposed to all just go, he forgot how to coach. That all was a fluke. Those 15 years or whatever were a fluke. It's not fair. Now he has to make changes, and he may have to make staff changes, NIL changes, the way he evaluates. He knows as well as anybody he needs to make changes. But this thought of like, oh man, I think now we live in this world where it's like we're just ready to fire people constantly. And
constantly.
I think even I need to be reminded sometimes, as miserable as I have been during this Baylor season, no, there are no conversations that need to be had about Scott other than he's got to make some changes on how he does things. And here's
an interesting opinion I had. This is like my hottest take of like, it's not real, but it did cross my mind, right? And it can kind of grab you. Like a real hot take would be like, right now, if Baylor's searching for an athletic director, Doug McNamee doesn't get the job because Scott maybe doesn't have as much juice as he did back when they made the hire, right? Now that is like floats through my mind as like one of these people who hosts a show like you and is looking for interesting things to say and talk about. But the legitimacy of that rolls right out of my brain. Because Scott Drew should have as much juice as any college basketball coach within his athletic department, regardless of how this year goes. You've talked about this on your show. I've heard you. You do a great job of Look, Roy Williams, Mike Krzyzewski. We're not talking about one down year. Those guys had multiple down years in environments where, people there was. I remember I was a senior in high school in 1995 or 96, and Coach K had such a bad year the year before, and then he had the back trouble. He just kind of disappeared, and we kind of forget about that. Like that was a real down time for him and the program, and they bounced back. The most interesting thing for Coach Drew and for Baylor and for almost every coach around America is like, okay, how do we make a change here? How do we shift gears? I know that they're not waiting. They would like some guardrails or someone to come in and be the adult in the room. But like, until that happens, you got to find ways to evaluate talent, get it onto your roster, find a way to mix everything together. Bill Self's a great example. By Kansas standards, last year was a stinker. They were a 7 seed going into the tournament. That's the highest seed they've ever been in his career at Kansas. And they'd missed on portal guys, big time. And then this year he hits a couple home runs with Melvin Council and Trey White. Because could you imagine if they didn't have a guy like Council or a leader like Trey White with all the stuff that's going on with Darren Peterson? That would be probably a rough deal. Like, we talked to Bill Self. I had the Kansas-Oklahoma State game on Wednesday, and you say Melvin Council, the moment you get to the C in his last name, he's like, Self would be like, stud. He loves him. Finally, he got a guy that's like as advertised as a man and as a player. And it just proves how hard it is to land that nowadays.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how when you're around Self and from afar, you can say, well, he's arrogant. He's probably an unlikable type guy. And I could see people thinking that. And I remember going to games and people would heckle him, and our friend Ashley Hodge would go after him and all. But he has a disarming way about him, because like even after Kansas loses at your place, like when they would lose at Foster or lose at Farrell Center, the way he handles himself at a post-game news conference is much different than a Cronin or some of these guys that are just, my Gottlieb's a buddy of mine, and he just lost it the other night, and he's kind of apologized for that. But I think what you can do with you having these private even kind of conversations with these coaches is like give people a little bit of a picture of what they're like. And I think Self is kind of a candid, kind of interesting, funny dude, isn't he? I mean, like, even though you might have a different opinion of him going into those things.
Yeah, I've had 3 Kansas games over the course of my career, and every time I've talked to him, you always walk away feeling kind of better, which is always a great sign. And I don't think that's like a manipulation tactic by him. I think that's really who he is. He's just a genuine guy who's like curious about other people. And he's also a savant. The guy I called the game with, Matt Mulebach, was on the Arizona Final Four team in '88. And Greg Gurley's the Kansas analyst, right? And Greg was like, hey, Matt was on the '88 Arizona team in the Final Four. And they were like, can you name the starting lineup? To Self. And Self knocks down everybody in the lineup and does Kenny Lofton and Judd Bushler off the bench, like a savant, and it was really cool. He was real proud of himself because he struggled getting Bushler at the end. And then he was like, Judd Bushler, 35. It was awesome. And he was, as somebody like you're right. Like you get a chance to have those meetings and you don't want to take advantage of them. But, we had to ask him about Darren Peterson. And for me, the guy Matt, who I was calling the game with, he asked it first. The typical Matt, right? Little SHIT stir like you, so he asked him, he was like, hey, we got to ask about Darren. And I thought it was really telling because before the game, just like he had talked about in the media, he backed Darren Peterson. Like the guy's been hurt. He was definitely very sick before that Arizona game. He's had a string of bad luck. Hamstrings are tricky. But Wednesday night, his comments afterwards, it felt like for the first time, he was completely left out of the decision-making. Like he wasn't even aware that was going to happen. And I think that he's frustrated by that. And he did like you said, he did a masterful job of not getting too worked up and not like totally hanging the kid out to dry. but I think he was transparent in like, hey, this is getting pretty crazy. I understand, you know?
Yeah, oh man, remind me to tell you a story about a high school coach I was interviewing when I was a young reporter who who gave me one version of for my story, and then when I was like thanking him to leave, he gave me the real version about the kid, and I was just like, wait, and it's a great one. I'll tell it to you
It's
next
great
time we're
journalism
together.
101, right? Like, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about while you were talking about Bill Self. Can you imagine for like Scott and Bill Self in like 2018 through 2022, basically, they're kind of running the conference, and Kansas ran it. I should add this: Kansas, Bill Self ran it, and Roy before him since the beginning of the Big 12, right? I mean, they ran it for 20 something years.
It's
And then all
amazing
of a sudden,
when you look at the legacy. It's amazing.
yeah. And then all of a sudden, around 2021 or 22, Iowa State was just out there. Prom had just flatlined and had this horrible right around COVID, right? Right,
Two
right
and
around then.
22. 2-22.
Yeah. And all this, they hire Otzelberger, who at the time I'm like, okay. I mean, what he was out at UNLV. He had been on those staffs at Iowa State, so he had some equity in that. But still, I'm just kind of like, all right, whatever. I don't know who this is. Otzelberger gets hired. Kelvin comes in to the conference from Houston. Arizona, Sean Miller finally, they didn't fire him for cheating. They fired him for finally losing, right? And so they fired him. They hired Tommy Lloyd. Tech hires Grant McCaslin after Mark Adams did some weird scriptural stuff, and the whole post-beard stuff got weird. And then BYU in recent years brings in the NBA guy who I was like, I don't really know who this guy is. I don't know. It's like for Scott and Bill, it's like they looked up one day and there was this influx of unbelievable head coaches. Now we knew Kelvin was great. We didn't know he would just dominate the conference. But to me, we can put all those Baylor stats out and the Bill Self stats, and all of those are great. But the Houston stat is still one that just kind of blows my mind because and you've covered these games, and so these, by heart. But it's like 45-6 or 45. He enters the Big 12, and day one he goes, not only, okay, we're here, and Huggins is laughing. He won't do that in the Big 12, will he?
Yeah.
And he just crushes the Big 12. It took Lloyd and then Ott's getting great. It took even those hires to even try to remotely hold Kelvin in check. Without those losses at Hilton, he would be like 47-3 in the conference.
It's remarkable.
Again, you talking about Self, it's kind of made me think of that. And it's kind of wild because as great as Scott and Bill have been, it's almost like this surge of new coaches kind of have put them in check a little bit.
Well, yeah, I think you are spot on with that. I also think you can even enhance like what Kelvin Sampson did, right? Like when Mac Rhodes hires him, they hadn't been to they hadn't won a tournament game, I don't think, since Phi Slamma Jamma. I think that's what it was. And that was a dormant program, and the building was like you said, like a flat line. The program was, and that is done a 180. And then you're right. You bring in these young coaches who have just done a lot right. They've done a lot right, and I think you can also. And I'm not here to say that Scott Drew or Bill Self is like, it's past midnight for them, right? As far as like they got to get out. But I do think that the way that those guys won, it's changed. Like I get the vibe, and nobody told me this, but all the preparation you do getting ready for these games. I get the vibe that if Kansas were to go to the Final Four or win a national championship, like it will be on the table for Bill Self to possibly retire. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think that some of these coaches that are a little older, this is tough sledding for them, right? We know that, and there's no real end in sight as far as every 5 minutes you got to turn around and get a new player, and you're worried about the players in-house are going to leave. And also, how do you build your roster? I always go back to, Jay Wright. I can remember when I was working at KWTX pulling for Baylor. I'd been in Waco a few years.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm Villanova guy through and through, being from Philadelphia, and my whole family went there. And I was so proud of the way that Baylor and Villanova both played basketball on the floor, and they were good. And I always thought to myself, I'm so proud and fortunate to be affiliated with these two schools and the way that they comport themselves, like on the floor, their basketball program. And you just can't win like that anymore. And I'm talking like 5 years ago, like the recipe for Jay Wright to have success and to win a national championship at Villanova no longer exists in college basketball. And I think he saw that and maybe some other stuff, and he wanted to kind of move on. And I think a lot of these guys are just maybe built a little bit different. Not that Jay has this like amazing, like he's more, he's more open-minded or has more going on in his life than Scott does. That's not true. But I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like Scott Drew or Bill Self follows that lead at some point. And now you mentioned it, these young guys are kicking ass. They kind of know the buttons to push, and they're a little more tapped into how you can do this. It's interesting, man. And I hate that because I don't like change. And I like Bill Self. I like Scott Drew. I like Jay Wright. Like, I don't want those guys to go anywhere. I hope they don't.
Wouldn't it be interesting to know like Tech's NIL budget as opposed to Baylor or Arizona?
Yes.
And like,
yes,
I think there's some thought that maybe Baylor is well behind in that area. Although, Roach and Norchad, I think they spent big money. Those were big ticket items.
Yeah.
And I don't. What I don't know is like how far Baylor's behind in that area. And so what has to happen is, and Kelvin was recently, he almost kind of had to back off that, was talking about like how poor they were at Houston. And everybody's kind of like, well, you got 2 one-and-dones right now, and I don't know exactly how poor that is.
Steve Lutz said the same thing to us on Wednesday night. He was like, and we didn't ask, hey, how you going to play? Well, we got to play with pacing. We have to get up and down the floor. We have to create mismatches in transition, because if we don't, Kansas, who has way more money than us and way more tradition and everything going for them, if we get into a half-court matchup with their athletes, we're done. Like he's basically saying, like Matt, he's saying my whole way of coaching and the way I build my roster is around the fact that we are the have-nots, which I was like, man, that's interesting, that he just came out and said it.
Yeah. Somebody's texting us in saying that Scott deserves a statue when he retires.
I agree. There's no question.
He probably should already have one. I mean, he
probably should.
Yeah.
He probably should. I mean, because you forget, you compared his turnaround to Signetti, and you know better than anybody, there was way more of an underbelly to the Scott thing than the Signetti thing. And the way that like Scott's faith and everything kind of moved mountains to make all that work, that was all part of the recipe. It's one of the most amazing. I know somebody tried to do a documentary on it a few years ago, and I don't know, it got kind of sideways. I that is an amazing. Somebody needs to do like a rock solid, we always say now the 30 for 30. I don't care if it's HBO or Amazon. Somebody needs to do a good documentary on it. Because they did a good one on the scandal in 2003. How about we do a good one on the turnaround in 2021 or 22?
I have hard feelings toward that Showtime when they did not talk to me, and I was heavily involved in.
Yeah, they talked to Julie Hayes, and they didn't talk to you. Julie's amazing, but she was, yeah.
I broke the news of the of who pulled the trigger. Like
that was crazy.
That was when newspapers were still a big deal. It was early in the days of the newspaper, but that was when Dotson was about to confess to the FBI we had that story that the morning news, Lee Hancock and I. Okay, this McCaslin thing. I saw his news conference earlier today. He's a good friend, and it's tough to watch.
Yeah.
And when a team loses just a superstar player, and that infuriates you about that. I think that would make me even madder if I was like a Kansas fan, is you look at a kid who cares and is that upset and would, if he could, he'd be like Lindsey Vonn. If he could go out there and play on that ACL, he would try to do it. Yeah. And you can't even get Peterson to get you through a game. But that said, do you that loss is just huge. I guess it's interesting, isn't it? We celebrate all these freshmen, and there's a bunch of great ones, but still, in this day and age, to have a monster like Toppin, a big, 6'7", 6'8" dude who's undersized for a post player, and even though the whole building knows he's going left, what an amazing player that honestly he gave them the chance to go deep in the tournament. And now, sadly, although don't underestimate Grant, but sadly, probably not as much of a chance now.
Yeah, it sucks. And you did a great job touching on that. Like he came back, right? And so did Christian Anderson. And that says so much about Grant McCaslin and what he's building and the job that he's doing there. Same thing at BYU. Like Kevin Young now has to pull off a masterful performance as a coach to take this team who was preseason, top 10, much like Texas Tech, or top 5. And now you got to figure out a way, how are we going to reassess and move forward? I think with Texas Tech, I do believe that like their style of play helps them. But then again, if you talk to Grant, like he would probably say they don't play the type of defense they would need to without JT Toppin. With BYU, I think the guy Kennard Davis has to step up. Arizona's without Koa Pete, at least through this weekend. It's that time of year, and it sucks when you have stars get hurt. And because Richie Saunders is another guy who could probably be a first-round draft pick. He may have been higher as far as pros are concerned, maybe a higher evaluation than JT Toppin. Do with that what you want. But you got a couple of superstars who are now done for the rest of the season in the Big 12, which sort of opens that race back up a little bit, I guess. It was always kind of anybody, but now it's less of anybody.
I was trying to lift Grant's spirits. I don't think he was ready for humor. I said some nice things, and then I followed it up with, you do have a Mosley on the roster. You need to lean into that now. I don't know.
Did you get him a smile?
No, this is just us texting back and forth.
Okay.
So I don't know. Hopefully so.
Yeah.
But he spells it wrong. He spells it with a Mosley.
Yeah.
But I did see him appear in one of those recent games against Arizona State, and he actually was dunking, and he's 6'6", 6'7". Who knows? Maybe Grant. If I were Grant, I would just turn this thing. March is about guards. He's got 3 dudes that can all shoot the 3. Petty, Anderson, and Atwell. Like, just turn it into guard heaven, right?
Well, it's like we saw if you remember that game against Baylor, like Atwell, it's like he hit everything he shot. They're going to need that. They're going to need guys to get hot at the right time because you need a guy, right? Christian Anderson's still awesome. You still have a guy you can give the ball to when the shot clock or game clock is running down, which is a good feeling if you're a head coach. But without Toppin, obviously things change a lot. But yeah, they're going to have to get way more perimeter for sure.
It's so funny. Grant gets after players so old school, for such a nice, great, and players love him and work for him. And I guess you have to earn the ability to get up in a player's face like that. But isn't that interesting that there's certain NFL coaches or like Brian Kelly, we all thought bad guy. He's always screaming at everybody and getting in people's faces. And with Grant, I think because he's such a nice person, but man, I will tell you, he gets on his players worse than Bill Self or just about anybody. It's interesting to watch.
Yeah. And he gets a pass in a sense where he's earned their trust. Like, those kids know that he truly, deeply cares about them. And, I think we underestimate the smarts of some of these young people, like they see through a lot of that stuff, the transactional nature of coaching, and they see that they have a real life advocate and a guy who can make them better. And so he kind of, it's like, I'm sober, right? So we say this in the 12-step program I'm a part of. If you ask me to be your sponsor, you've immediately given me the right to take your inventory at any time, right? Like you want me to help you. It's the same thing in the coaching profession. Like if you want to get better as a player and you're a real athlete who's willing to go to any lengths to make the NBA or make your team better, then your coach is going to have a little bit of grace to get on your rear end. And we see the same thing in Houston with Kelvin Sampson. I mean, I saw him ride Milos Uzan last year in a practice to the point where I wanted to go home for the kid. And guess what? He decides to come back and stay at Houston because he knows there's one guy who's going to make him better and one guy who really loves him and cares about him, and it's Kelvin Sampson. And there is I ask coaches what we're talking about. Like, what do you do now to get through to these guys? Like, what's the separator from you and someone else? And it's like, those guys, they have to know you care about them. And if they know that you care about them, you get a little bit of wiggle room to kind of tell them like it really is, and it's pretty cool because that's how you and I were raised. And I think that does a pretty solid job of moving you in the right direction, or people who are going to get on you and tell you what you don't want to hear.
Yeah. My dad was certainly willing to do that. And in fact, it just
My
came to
dad
mind.
too.
Yeah. I mean, like there one particular time when I was old enough and dumb enough to try as a, I don't know, 10, 13, 12-year-old to try to run from my dad.
Oh,
And I was racing around the house, making some really good moves.
there's nowhere to go, buddy. I've been there. I remember doing the same thing, thinking there's nowhere left to go. Like, and just,
but this time, Pete, my dad slipped and fell while trying to pursue me.
That's worse than getting away.
No, but the good news is it all worked out somehow. Maybe either my mom, I don't know, but somehow, and I think my sister was scared for my life, and he started laughing. Like somehow the fall got me through So anyway, but
by the way, you've been after that same type of relationship throughout your career, the way you question some of these coaches and have all kinds of great back talk for them. So obviously it served you well.
Yeah, I've had, some have wanted to chase me, and even Scott Drew, even the mild-mannered Scott Drew, I've gotten under his skin a couple of times. My reporting during COVID did not please Scott when one time I decided to report everybody who would or would not be in the lineup that night. And he felt he felt like I was going a little too far on that. Pete, thank you, buddy. I tell you, you're a busy man. This is the time of year you're traveling a lot, but I always love our conversations. And
anytime you need me, I can hop on next week. Whenever you need me, let me know. Reach out.
I'll have my people reach out to your people.
You can reach out to me.
All right. Okay. You and I can talk. Thank you, Pete.
All right, Matt. See you, buddy.
There he goes. Pete Sousa.